So I wanted to talk about memory real quick. I find goosebumps. I find the topic fascinating, but it's also one of those things where I'm like, well, there's no answers, so what's the point in talking about it? It's never it's just one of those things where I'm like, it's like trying to analyze dreams or doing a Rorschach test, like inkblot thing. It's really interesting, but there's nothing tangible to hold on to, and you can't come up with a specific answer necessarily. So, sorry, memory. Let's talk about memory. I've had a couple episodes from years ago that I did on memory, but I was thinking about it the other day. I don't know, it's been a theme for the past couple of weeks, and I think that it's one of those things that in my life, it's something that I definitely go back to a lot because I get too nostalgic, and I've talked about emotional memory before and what that means to me, but this is different. So, basically, I just think it's bananas. Okay, so the science in memory is that every time you access a memory, you change it. You alter that memory. So over time, that memory can change more and more and more and more and more. There's a possibility you can go back and forth too, and then in a way kind of almost stay central to like the truth or the accuracy of what that feeling was, or what the reality of the situation was, what that experience really was, and what you felt in that moment. So over time, you could, I don't know how to start this. Okay. How do I don't know. I feel like I need to give this an analogy, but I don't know what it is. If you were to access a memory, it'd be like walking into a room, and every time you walk into that room, it's like you leave something behind. Even though you just walk in the room and you take a look around, and you take a breath, and then you walk back out, you've shifted the air in that room, you've left some dirt behind. What if you walk into that room with really muddy boots, and you are really frustrated and you stamp your feet on the ground and you leave a lot of mud behind? Or what if you walk in there very gently, right? Or what if you walk in there and you're super happy and you have a party in that room and you've got confetti all over the floor when you leave, or glitter that you were having to wear that day? Like, you don't necessarily think or you're on purpose doing anything in that space except accessing the room and observing it, but you leave something behind. So when you are accessing a memory, just in your neural pathways and stuff, what happens is that you end up strengthening, no, it's like strengthening the neural pathway, strengthening the ease of access to that memory, but you remember it differently when you leave and when you access it again next time. So it's really tough because, like, if there's something you haven't really been thinking about, like there's the memory of being like, oh, I remember that, okay, cool, and then you walk away from that and you leave and that's it. But there's also the, like, I'm going to dwell on this memory and really think about it and stay in the room for a long time and breathe that air for a long time and shift the dust around or whatever. And you could do that calmly and meditatively, but you are still strengthening your ease of access to the memory, but also altering that memory. If I come to, it's like association. If I come to that room and I'm upset and I've got muddy boots on and I leave that track of mud behind, it's still going to be there when I get there next time. But if the next time I come and I also come upset and I'm with muddy boots and whatever, then that track of mud, I'm just leaving more dirt behind. If I come to the space with a meditative state, maybe trying to reflect in a different way and calm and peace and trying to clean up a bit, maybe when I leave the room, I take some of that mud with me on the bottom of my socks and it's not there as much. I feel I need to stop using the analogy, but it's something that happens. So if I'm accessing a memory and I have, man, it just gets tough if like, what if that memory is, if I haven't accessed that memory for years and years and years, I don't really have a great accuracy of what the experience was. If I'm years away from the real experience that happened, if I'm trying to remember something that happened 5 years ago and I'm thinking like, yeah, that was really brutal, that was rough, that was whatever, or just like I don't like that, or like if I'm accessing the memory in a space that is a negative space, if it's not a safe place, if I'm doing it in such a way that is not coming from a meditative, reflective, peaceful, calm place, and I'm angry, I'm like, yeah, it's just like this time, and I'm comparing it to this time now, I'm making an association, and it's a negative. Making a negative association, and I'm approaching the memory in hostility, and therefore leaving a bunch of mud and dirt behind and maybe trashing the room, and it's easier that the next time I access it, that'll still be there, and it's easier to kind of add to that. So every time I'm accessing that memory, if it's in a negative place, that memory over time shifts, and the reality of what happened is distorted from what actually happened. And I'm entering that room all the time and being like, yeah, that sucked. I remember this really sucked. Yeah, it was horrible. When really, maybe it wasn't that bad. But my perception of that has just shifted over time and changed. But it's not time by itself, because that would mean, oh, I just don't really remember. I just don't really remember what happened that much. Versus, I've spent a lot of time, in the room in a negative place, and I've changed it. But if I never thought about it for 10 years, they'd be like, yeah, I don't really remember what that was like, huh? Versus, like, there's some things like, oh yeah, I remember that was brutal, because you have come back to that memory a lot, maybe in that negative place. That can happen on the opposite end. I think you can have really fond memories, and the reality is not that great. It's just like, oh, I remember that day we went to the fair, and the sun was shining, and we skipped down the sidewalk with ice cream, and like, and over the course of time, if you're recalling that memory, like maybe one of the reasons I would recall it on both of these ends, I guess, what is the reasoning for that? Why do you do that? Sometimes it's subconscious, right? I think most times it would be. But what if, so in that first example of leaving the dirt behind, what if I have a friend who is complaining about a relationship? And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of like when I had this relationship, so-and-so did this and this and this, and you're trying to relate to that person, right? But maybe that gets cemented in a little more, and it's actually more negative than it really was because you're trying to relate to their experience. But then the next time you access that memory, you're like, yeah, it was pretty bad, like, and that can keep going. On the flip side, maybe I'm in a place where I'm longing for innocence and youth, and I miss all these things that were in the past. So I'm approaching that memory with like, oh man, like, those were the days, huh? Those were really great. But in reality, maybe they weren't that great. Maybe that day that I'm remembering at the beach with an ice cream cone and skipping down, maybe I forgot that some kid was really mean to me, or what, you know what I mean? Like, you're only accessing so much. The memory, unless you have photographic memory, that would be different. But you're going to miss bits and pieces by accident anyway. I think it's all subconscious. Like, it's all just like, I don't think we're going into reflection. I mean, sometimes it's not even a choice. It's just something associates with something else, and that's kind of it. And other times you purposely reflect, and that purposefulness can alter that memory too. No matter what you do, you're altering that memory. Your mindset and your mood and time and associations and everything else that's happened from the day that experience occurred to now when you access the memory informs how you process that memory and how you remember it, how you remember the event. It would be really interesting to have photographic memory for that aspect of like, oh, those memories don't change. I remember it exactly. And I wonder if that would be better or worse. Because I think that sometimes, here's the thing, is that you can lie to yourself. And then the thing is that you could consciously lie to yourself, but over time, you could forget that that was a conscious lie. And then when you access that memory next time, it's the truth. Because you don't remember lying about it. Over the course of time, you might forget how much you lied about it to yourself. What you chose to ignore, what you chose to enhance. And again, all this is so mixed up with subconscious stuff too. It's not just conscious choices being made. But I don't know, memory's a trip because it informs the present too. That past informs the present, and how you're reflecting on it informs so much. It's cold in here, I'm getting goosebumps. Yeah. But I've just been thinking about that a lot. And there's nothing you can really do about it other than like try to approach memory and conscious reflection with more of this in mind, I guess, to be like, hey, I can't rely on memory. Because that's the thing, you can't. I think that you have to accept that you cannot rely on your memory for accuracy as to how the events actually occurred. How you feel about the events over time don't just change because you've accessed the memory in different ways, and therefore you've created neural pathways that are different, and you've altered the memory. You can also just be in a different position in life and realize, you know what? Like, this is the memory, this is how I felt, this is what happened, but I don't feel that way anymore. Which I think that's a very separate thing, right? Of like, you change your feelings about that event, and you can acknowledge how you did feel, but you don't feel whatever that is anymore. You reflect on that, you look at that memory different, you look at that instance and that experience in a different light, very purposefully, and acknowledge that. But you can't rely on memory. And it's an interesting thing too, because legally, there's still places and still courts that are just like, oh, like, let's rely on witness testimony. Why? You cannot trust your memory. You can't. You always have a bias, and your lens is skewed, always. Relying on witness testimony is complete garbage. It shouldn't be allowed, frankly. Just the science tells us that, and has been telling us that for a long time. You might believe that your memory is accurate, but it is not. It is not. No matter how much you believe it, you have to acknowledge that it is not 100%. If it's just like, I said this 30 seconds ago, and sometimes you're like, oh, I didn't say that verbatim. There was a word there I didn't say that I thought I said, or whatever. But I mean, there's little mistakes, and then, again, it's just over time, things alter too. And depending on how you approach the memory, it alters, it changes, and it's not the same. So, memory is unreliable. And I just wonder, again, if you had a photographic memory, how would that change things? How would that change your life? How does that influence your reflective process on things? Is it easier to change as a person with a photographic memory? Because you have the exact account, you're like, I remember how horrible that felt. Think about this. If I'm thinking about, oh man, the last time that I drank, it was too much, and I remember I felt really bad the day after, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. I'm not a fan of what happened that time. And over time, if I forget about that, I'm like, you know what, I feel like drinking. And then I'm like, yeah, whatever, last time wasn't that bad. Like, I just, whatever, you know? And then, again, the next time that same thing happens, I mean, you can form habits. I wonder how much easier it would be to grow as a person, to stop doing certain things, to start doing certain things with a photographic memory where you can't, like, subconsciously or consciously, you're not changing it. You can't lie to yourself about it. It's like, no, my brain remembers 100% of that. But with that might come a lot of pain, too. Because I think that one thing that we do subconsciously is that we can bury and alter memories because they're way too painful for us to experience again in their truth.